And we are live. Today I have my good friend Chris Andre boxing with me today. How have you been?
I'm great. Thank you, Max, for having me on. How are you?
Of course, man. I'm doing well also. Great to hear. We had a big night of fights yesterday. We had Robesi Ramirez fight. We had Vasil Lomachenko. We had William Zepeda, Jojo Diaz. It was a great night of boxing. It was a great event. What did you think about some of these performances? Let's start off with the Robesi Ramirez fight. How did you think he looked? What was your thoughts and assessment on the fight?
So I thought Ramirez, obviously, we know he's this fantastically talented fighter, so accurate. The way he's able to set up that backhand and always seems to find a home for it because he's such a fantastic fighter in understanding angles and distance. So I'm a huge fan of his, and I saw exactly what I expected from him. There were moments where, as the commentary team touched upon, he was a little bit frustrating at times by not raising the tempo in moments where I felt he could have. Um, I'm also wondering a little bit at points about his feet. Not that he doesn't have fantastic footwork, because we know he does, but sometimes to me he can get a little bit lazy and just bring his feet a little bit close together when he gets quite close to an opponent. And sometimes that can cause a bit of a problem, whereby if you hit him on the right moment, if you catch him with the correct timing, you can catch him a little bit off balance. But he keeps guys gun shy because of how accurate he is. And yeah, I think he's a terrific fighter. He really is, and has a massive future in the sport.
Yeah, for sure. I was very impressed in him as well. There's a lot of good fights can be made for him. Yeah, I feel there were parts of the fight where he could have been a little more dominant, let his hands go a little more, but very good power, very good fundamentals, good timing, and very good finisher. Apparently, him versus Isaac Dogboe is going to happen next in February for the vacant WBO title at 126. What do you think about that potential fight, and how do you see it playing out?
I mean, Dogboe's a very exciting fighter. I always enjoy watching his performances. When he first fought Navarrete, at the time, here in the UK at least, and I'm assuming pretty much everywhere, Navarrete was a massive underdog. And I remember looking at that, and he wasn't really yet known at the time. And I remember looking at that and thinking, wow, these odds are pretty incredible. And even in live play, he was 10-1 at one point to win by stoppage. And I thought, wow, I've got to get me some of that action. And so Navarrete was able really to beat him by making it very, very uncomfortable, by really turning it into a brawl. That's not really Ramirez's game, but Ramirez, to me, although he might not be the sort of guy that applies that level of incessant pressure with all these unorthodox shots that come from different angles, he varies his angles very, very well. The trajectory of his shots very, very well. And he does it from the perspective of being a smart boxer, rather than I'm going to overwhelm you like a tsunami of pressure, like a Navarrete might do. And so, although it's a different approach, I just think Dogboe, as much as I like him, I think it's another big step up for him. And I just think Ramirez really has a chance to take over at 126, to be honest.
Yeah, I think Ramirez is going to defeat him as well. I'm a big fan of him. I'm pretty biased because I've had him on the channel. I've talked to his manager. They're a great group of guys, and I'm definitely going to support them. But I see he has too much in the store for Dogboe, too much talent, too much ability, and I see him outpointing him. I don't think he'll stop him, but I do think he'll take over in the later rounds and win a wide decision. 126, a very interesting division. Very interesting. I mean, this has actually become one of my more favorite divisions because of how slept on it is. You got Mauricio Lara still hanging around, Gary Russell, Mark Magsayo, Dogboe, Robesi Ramirez, Leigh Wood, Michael Conlon, Luis Lopez, Josh Warrington. I mean, this weight class is very interesting and very fun for sure. We got my good friend Nordic Warrior in here. Salute to Nordic. Definitely make sure to do a collab with you sometime down the line. If you guys haven't already, check out Nordic Warrior's channel. He says he just watched the Loma fight in full. Loma got a gift, in his opinion, poor decision. I actually thought Loma edged it out personally, but he looked very poor. I think this is by far the worst Loma has looked, and it's a little surprising because, yes, Jermaine Ortiz is solid, and I think he definitely looked better than I expected him to, but this is a guy that Loma was supposed to be pretty convincingly. You're supposed to put him away and get the stoppage, or at least win a wide decision, and he went completely life and death. I mean, the fact that people could even argue he lost his fight really speaks volumes. What did you think of the fight? How did you have it scored, Chris?
I had it 7-5 to Lomachenko.
Me too, yeah, 7-5.
I did think, however, that the second, the third, and the sixth were swing rounds. And the second I gave to Ortiz, and the third and the fifth I gave to Loma. So if somebody was to give them all to Ortiz and they had him winning 7-5, or if they gave one of those extra ones to Ortiz and they had it a draw, I don't have a problem with it. I thought 117, 111 was far too wide. But I just felt that Lomachenko, look, I think he's a terrific fighter, no doubt about it. He's one of the most naturally skilled fighters in the entire sport. But people can't just overlook physicality and athleticism. And the fact of the matter is, he's a guy who's operating at a much higher weight category than what is his natural size. And when it's a guy that's based on natural reflexes and angles, and he's up against more youthful guys who have athletic gifts, as he ages, and make no mistake, for his age, he's a very old lightweight now. He's starting to really push on in age. You're going to see that slight decline. And it's, in some regards, it reminded me a little bit of Ugas and Pacquiao, whereby Pacquiao's still showing he's still up there among the best in the division, but Ugas was just a half a step ahead. Last night, I felt that it was Loma that was able to pull it back, and he was just half a step ahead because I had it 5-3 to Ortiz going into the last 4 rounds, and I felt that he swept the last 4 Lomas. So he salvaged it. He pulled it out the bag, but he wasn't turning defense to attack. That transition of just slipping out of the pocket and coming back in very quickly, he wasn't doing that as swiftly as he once did. So I do think that it was, terrific heart and adjustment, adaptability from Loma. But to me, we're starting to see signs of decline. And, when you see sometimes these top level fighters, when they're right at the top of the game, when you're on the top of Mount Everest, as you start that descent, you're still well above the rest of the world. And so people can sometimes forget how much higher somebody was. Unless they see a dramatic decline quickly, people can forget, he was an even greater level than he is now. If you go and rewatch some of his older fights, you'll see how much sharper he was. And I just think that Loma's just starting now the decline, really. And whatever happens in his next fight, which we're all hoping, fingers crossed, will be Devin Haney, win, lose, or draw, I think he should definitely consider hanging them up, leaving the sport with his faculties intact, and what would be a tremendous legacy, particularly if he was to beat Devin Haney.
Oh, for sure, most definitely. I saw Nordic. He made a comment in my video where he said that Loma should retire. And I thought about it, and I said to myself, at most, Loma should have is 2 more fights, if we're being honest. This is a guy where when a fighter gets old and they start to slow down, the last thing to go is the power. And Loma literally relies on everything but his power. Reflexes, speed, agility. All of these have slowed down considerably for Loma, where he's still a very good fighter. We can see the decrease. You can see the slowdown. And he should fight Devin Haney, win, lose, or draw, have 1 more fight after that, and call it quits. Because, yes, he can very well win that fight, but it's honestly, Loma 2-3 years ago, I'd comfortably pick him. At this stage, I'm really not sure. This guy's gotten a lot slower. He's gotten a lot. His defense has actually gotten a lot worse. I think that was probably the most noticeable thing, is his defense in his bout against Ortiz. And honestly, at 34, 35 years old, I would say call it maybe 2 more fights and then call it a day for sure. Nordic says Haney looked massive standing next to Loma. That's going to be telling if the fight happens. Oh, yeah, he looked way bigger than Vasyl Lomachenko. He looked heavier, bigger, taller, longer. It's going to be a very difficult fight for Loma, unfortunately, because this is a guy where a few years ago I would have picked him comfortably, but now I'm really not sure. Chris, do you have a pre-fight prediction for that bout if it does happen next?
Well, look, I'm not ready to commit 100% before I do a little bit more film study in terms of a prediction, but I will say this. I believe that there are 3 sort of subsets, if you like, of obstacles that he'll have to overcome. Firstly, it's one of age. The reality is something I always say on my channel: the only undefeated, undisputed fighter who will never, ever lose is Father Time. And when you have age come into it with a guy who's reflex-based, like you've touched upon there yourself, you're going to see certain elements of decline. That's one thing that is just unavoidable. The other is natural size. And the reality is, you saw last night when Lomachenko was coming close to Ortiz and they were coming into the pocket, Loma was trying to smother him with a particular move whereby he was grabbing the lead arm and hugging the lead arm. And then, so he's hooked the lead arm of Ortiz. With his left hand, he was then trying to get it around the outside of the arm of Ortiz. So with the left arm, he's almost hugging his entire body. With the right arm, he's isolating the lead hand. And the idea there is to stop any hooks coming through from the right-hand side, and literally to stop anything coming from the left. And he's trying to push his chest onto Ortiz's chest and just turn his head away and hide it over the shoulder of Ortiz. The problem that he had is that Ortiz was very comfortable in that situation, being the bigger, stronger man, to relax, keep that backhand shoulder just a little bit further back to create space. And he was launching the uppercut right inside the pocket consistently. So what you saw is this roughhousing tactic where he was having a lot of success against Loma. Well, Devin Haney's very good at doing that too. So when you're talking about a bigger, physically stronger man who might be able to roughhouse Loma on the inside, that's another obstacle. The third obstacle is a stylistic obstacle, whereby regardless of any time these guys would have fought, there are going to be certain advantages that Loma would have had and certain advantages that Haney would have had, just stylistically based on their skill set. And what you saw on a couple of occasions last night, something Devin Haney's very good at doing. When Loma's seeking to jump in, because he's got to cover quite a lot of ground because of that length advantage, you see that as he's rushing in, Ortiz would dip down low and then launch in with his shoulder, almost like a shoulder charge, to either knock Loma back or to initiate a clinch. Now, that's something that Haney's very good at and did it incessantly, particularly in the first fight against George Kambosos. And it nullified Kambosos because at range, he was too short to reach him. And when he'd get close, he'd get tied up. If that's going to be a problem for Lomachenko, he's got much better feet, of course, than Kambosos, but he's still the smaller guy that has to cover a lot of ground quickly. And so those little stylistic elements there, having to bypass that long reach, then when you get in, don't smother your work, have enough space to work. These are little difficulties he's going to have to overcome. And Haney's a younger man, physically strong, coming into his prime. It's tough, Max. It's tough.
I think I may have to actually edge out Devin because when I really think about it, I want Loma to win the fight, but, you know, you can't lie to yourself. And the fight happens. I honestly think I'm just my gut. You know, first of all, if it's a close fight, Loma's not getting a decision against Devin. And I don't see Loma being able to win convincingly against Devin. If he wins, he'd be like 7-5. You know what I mean? So if it's a close fight, he's not getting a decision. Politics are against him. Haney's sharper. He's younger. He looked very good against George. I don't care what anyone says. That rematch looked very sharp offensively. And yes, I think Jermaine Ortiz is much better than we gave him credit for. I would personally pick Jermaine Ortiz to beat George Kambosos, which most people disagree with me, but I actually think he would defeat George. However, even as Jermaine being better than we credit him for, Loma looked very poor in many aspects. As I mentioned, he's much smaller. He's older. He'd make it competitive, but I feel deep down my gut, when I really envision the fight, what would happen, I think Devin would probably edge him out by a competitive decision. Just my gut feeling telling me that, you know, the times have changed and it's Devin's time to get this victory. I'd also feel like I think Shakur would also defeat Loma at this stage. I'd still pick Loma to defeat Tank. I'd still pick him to defeat Ryan. I'd pick him to beat most guys, but guys like Haney and Shakur, these guys who have the reflex advantage over Loma, because that's Loma's main advantage over these other guys, his reflexes and his fundamentals and his athleticism. If he faces guys with these at his age and he's smaller than them and they're hungrier than him, arguably, I don't know, man. I think Loma's time might be numbered, which is a shame because Loma's probably my third or fourth favorite fighter in boxing. So I'm definitely not being biased when I say this type of stuff, but I think I'd give this slight edge to Devin Haney if they fought currently. Let's see. Nordic says Jermaine would school Kambosos. Yeah, I think Jermaine Ortiz would defeat George Kambosos. I really do. I think he'd outwork him to a decision. It'd definitely be closer to Haney fights, but he would outwork George for a decision. K-Swap says Loma should have got Devin early in 2019. You know, in hindsight, 2020, he definitely should have went for Devin earlier. The Teofimo fight was obviously the right decision at the time, but in hindsight, if he got that Haney win earlier and then fought Teofimo with his shoulder being recovered, it may have been a smarter call. Aaron says Loma still beats Haney. Haney has poor punch technique, does not have good defense. I think he has very good defense. His punch technique's poor, but he has good speed. He has good athleticism. He has good fundamentals, a good jab. He has a good motor. He's hungrier. He's younger. I think the only way that I actually see Devin losing is if he's too weight drained, which is possible, or if Loma fights Devin the way he fought in 2019, where we get the old Loma. But the current Loma that fought Jermaine Ortiz, maybe he was just shaking off ring rust. I don't think he'd beat Devin currently. Haney should fight very cautious. Just outpoint Loma pretty clearly. Wouldn't be? Yeah, that's definitely in the cards. I think Loma would make the fight exciting, but he would struggle. We know Loma has a very good engine. He comes forward, he pressures. He could get dirty if he has to, which, you know, if he has to, it's understandable. He would definitely make it a tough fight for Devin. But at this stage, I don't know if he'd be able to pull off the victory. Now, what do you think about Loma versus Shakur, Chris, if that fight happened next?
I'm with you. I think at this stage, Lomachenko is just not at his peak anymore. And you know, Shakur is a fantastic fighter. Recently, they asked Lomachenko of the lightweights. Well, they didn't actually ask about Ryan, which even though it was a DAZN show that was interviewing him, I found that quite interesting. But they asked him between Haney, Tank, and Shakur Stevenson, who he felt was the best lightweight. And he was essentially implying that it was Shakur based on his defense. And so, again, with the size difference there, because even Shakur, naturally speaking, is bigger than Lomachenko. If you see Shakur, say, standing next to Regis Prograis, you'll see that he's probably the bigger man. Lomachenko, of course, this is his third weight category. And so you're going to have a bit of a size discrepancy there, natural size discrepancy against a youthful guy who's coming into the peak of his career, and Loma's just on the decline. So I agree with you. I think at this point, you know, Shakur would be the justifiable favorite against Lomachenko. Can I just quickly go back to also what K-Swap was saying there about he should have taken the fight early in 2019.
Oh yeah,
It's,
go ahead.
it's interesting because, you know, hindsight's 2020. If he was to have beaten Teofimo Lopez and he was to become the undisputed lightweight champion, that's something that locks in legacy that will be spoken of forever. So I feel as though he had to go down that route.
I agree.
But if you look at, for instance, Floyd Mayweather, when he had his 6-fight deal with Showtime, he chose to fight Canelo Alvarez in the second fight of that 6. Now, if he'd waited to fight him in the 5th or the 6th, the fight would have actually become bigger financially. And Floyd's always told us, you know, he's money made. He's all about the money. If his focus really was all about the money, he would have fought Canelo a little bit later on, let him build his stock even more. Instead, he fought him when Canelo was still on the way up. He just caught him green. And he knew what he was doing there. You know, it was part of Floyd's, I guess, really fantastic ability to analyze the sort of opponents that he would fight and when to fight them, the timing of it. And sometimes knowing when to fight a guy is key. So I can totally see what K-Swap's talking about here. If Loma was to have gone after Devin, people would have been saying he's ducking Teofimo Lopez, no doubt. But with Teo struggling to make the weight maybe at lightweight, Devin Haney was still sort of up and coming, still learning his craft. If he'd beaten Devin Haney, with Teo then struggling a bit more to make the weight, say 8 months later on, from a tactical perspective, it would have been the smarter move. But hindsight's 2020, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. I mean, if he caught Devin early, and I always use Floyd and Canelo because this is the same reason why I think Crawford should have went for Virgil Ortiz a year or two ago, because the win would have aged so well. For legacy, in 20, 30 years from now, even now to an extent, no one really cares about Canelo's age. They just see that Floyd Mayweather beat Canelo Alvarez. That's what they remember. If Lomachenko fought and beat Devin Haney, yes, there would be the hardcore fans that would mention that he was green and this and that, but he would have beaten Devin Haney and then beaten Teofimo. I mean, yeah, in hindsight, if you could go back in time, I bet he would have changed how he did it. We all agree that him fighting Teofimo in 2020 was what he should have done when it happened. But for Loma, in Loma's career in general, just him, I think he would have changed his path for sure. Let's see. Francisco says, let's mention that Floyd was old as hell when he fought him too. It would have been 40 if he waited. Yeah, exactly. The fight would have been way tougher if he fought Canelo in his 5th or 6th fight on the Showtime deal as well. He may have lost it. It would have been a bigger money fight, but he may have lost that fight as well. And it would have been way, way more difficult for him.
And let's just add also to, you know, Francisco, this is not, I'm not seeking to attack Floyd by saying that. I'm not sitting here saying he caught him green because he was, you know, he was ducking a more sort of prime Canelo. I'm actually saying that in a way, it's a strength to be able to analyze where a guy's at. You know, matchmaking. There are promoters that will literally employ matchmakers. It's a key skill to know which path to go down and when. So he was able always to do that for himself because he was such a good reader of an opponent. So, you know, this is not an insult to Floyd in any way. I'm simply explaining that timing matters. And, you know, maybe Lomachenko, I mean, we'll go back to Kambosos as well. Kambosos was a straight warrior for taking the fights that he did when he did. You know, he wanted Lomachenko, he wanted Devin Haney. He's another one that could have gone down the route of fighting a couple of guys in Australia, guys who were, you know, Billy Dibb, for instance, the number 2 lightweight in Australia. That would have made a lot of money in Australia. He's also of Greek origin. There were a couple of other options he could have gone down. You know, in Australia, the sort of Greek Aussie fans have a lot of sort of rivalry with Croatian Aussie or Turkish Aussie fans. They could have found fighters from those countries and built those up. And in the meantime, Devin Haney, the fight happened, say, 18 months later, he's a lot heavier again and struggling with the weight. Or 18 months later, you're fighting Lomachenko, who, as we've seen, is starting to show signs of decline. Now, that's not to say he would beat the current Loma, but it increases your chances of winning. And so, again, sometimes it's more about timing. But I personally have to give massive props to guys that are willing to take on all that smoke whenever it presents itself. So, you know, you have to respect Lomachenko for going down the route that he went, which is why, for me, it's laughable when I often hear people say he ducked Devin Haney. No, it would have been a duck had he gone after Haney's lesser belt at the time and instead went after and instead avoided Teofimo Lopez, who had the only remaining belt.
Exactly. I never understood people that would say he ducked Devin to fight Teofimo. I mean, Teofimo had a belt and Devin was a prospect of no belt. That's like saying if Crawford fought Jaron Ennis instead of Errol Spence, I apologize. If he fought Errol Spence instead of Jaron Ennis, people would accuse Crawford of ducking Ennis. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Loma isn't going to fight both of them in the same night. You know what I mean? But I also want to ask you about the other card, Jojo Diaz versus William Zepeda. I mean, William Zepeda looked absolutely phenomenal, man. I mean, I'm loving these Mexican fighters that come forward and throw a lot of punches. The Mauricio Lara's, the Luis Lopez's, and of course now the William Zepeda's. What do you think of that fight? What do you think of his very dominant and impressive performance?
William Zepeda is an absolute nightmare because he's a guy who throws a lot of volume. He's heavy-handed with it. You know, it's not just pitter-patter stuff. Every shot he's throwing is heavy. He's tall and rangy as well. The one area where I believe you can probably get to him, he does seem to commit in a sense sometimes whereby he's there to be hit. And if you punch with him, you can potentially catch him and hurt him.
Yeah.
And we saw him hurt on a couple of occasions. The problem is you're going to have to go through hellfire to put yourself in that position to land. So again, when we're talking about styles, if you were to talk about the styles of the lightweights that might have caused him a problem, I know he's moved up now, but someone like Teofimo Lopez, who would have been very good at rolling with punches and coming back with powerful individual shots, he could be a real problem for Zepeda. However, a guy like Devin Haney, who's the current undisputed champion, and this is not to run down Devin Haney, because I also think any version of Kambosos gives any version of Lopez real problems stylistically, whereas stylistically he's no match for Devin Haney. But stylistically, Devin Haney would potentially have some real problems with Zepeda because he doesn't have that massive height and reach advantage. And because Haney likes to dictate the tempo behind the jab, he would be really forced to work hard against a guy who throws some heavy leather in Zepeda. And we've seen how at times Devin Haney can look a little bit vulnerable and his stamina late on in fights can, you know, decline a bit. So even from that perspective, when you're looking at the number one guy in the division at the moment, Devin Haney, and you look at Zepeda, you'd have to say, regardless of who you pick, he's a real threat even to him. So listen, he's a massive, massive prospect, if we can even call him that anymore. You know, he's a real contender at the moment. And yeah, he's one we've got to be excited about.
Oh, for sure. And I actually was picking Zepeda to win this fight. Jojo has had some pretty interesting accusations going on, very suspect accusations. And if they are true, I think he should never be able to put on boxing gloves ever again. But I was very happy Zepeda won, very impressed in him. And I thought it would be a very tough fight for Zepeda where he would have to dig deep and get a late stoppage or a close decision. But he was able to just outwork him the entire fight to a wide, very wide unanimous decision. Absolutely dominated Jojo. We've never seen anyone do that to Diaz. I mean, Devin Haney had actually a much closer fight against Diaz than people remember. That was a 7-5, 8-4 fight. That wasn't a 10-2 type of performance for Devin. He had a tough fight with Jojo, and William Zepeda dog-walked him. He absolutely dominated him, won very wide. And honestly, I think him versus Ryan Garcia is a much tougher fight than people realize. He has a much better shot at pulling off that victory. And if Ryan cannot fight Tank Davis or a somewhat decent opponent, he definitely should give William Zepeda that opportunity because that guy is dangerous. He has a great chin. He hits very hard, throws bunches of punches, keeps coming forward, has a great engine. I would love to see Ryan give William Zepeda a shot if the Tank fight falls through.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'd say about Jojo, I actually thought it was a little bit wider than you did, the Haney-Jojo fight. I thought 8-4 was about right. But early on in the fight, I felt that Jojo just gave up a lot of the rounds. And one of the reasons is because he likes to come in behind this high guard, walk you down, and he's trying to pick his moments. And as a result of that, he was getting outworked. And you saw that from a stylistic perspective. To fight that way, you have to be a puncher. Because if you're going to fight him in specific bursts that you pick, you've got to be able to hurt the guy. And because he's come up to lightweight and he's naturally smaller, I don't think he has that sort of power. He's got enough power to hurt guys, but not enough necessarily to potentially finish them with one shot. And so stylistically, I always felt that this fight was all wrong for Jojo. When it comes to how he would sort of go about, you know, building up, moving forward, Jojo, I wonder how he's going to be in this particular weight category with that style. He's going to be a guy who's going to cause a lot of guys problems, but he's not going to offer the sort of offensive arsenal that a Ryan Garcia can offer. So whilst we know Ryan can, you know, be dropped, we saw it against Luke Campbell, and Zepeda would certainly put it on him. There's also a lot of firepower coming from Ryan Garcia that maybe Jojo doesn't offer. And because you can punch with Zepeda, that would be a fireworks fight. You know, a lot of times it's easy for people to overlook Ryan Garcia because he's a pretty boy and, you know, people talk about him like he's Justin Bieber or something, but make no mistake, the boy's got some great physical attributes and he can fight. So as a spectacle, I agree with you, Max. It would be terrific. Have we lost
Sorry about that, bro. I had to close the door. Some people outside being a little louder. Anyways, yeah, I definitely agree. That would be a very interesting fight. Zepeda's offensive arsenal is quite tremendous. And Jojo, honestly, he's the type of guy where he Honestly, if we're being honest, he may even be a bit of an overaccomplisher, overachiever, because he's quite basic. He's tough. He has okay power. I mean, he hits Zepeda some nice shots. He has a very good chin and he's very tough. But against a guy like William Zepeda, I knew he didn't have the offense to keep up with him, the size or the strength. And I give him credit for being able to last the full 12 rounds, but Zepeda was just dominant. He absolutely schooled him. I got an interesting fight for you. I doubt it'll ever happen, but it's just for fun. William Zepeda versus Jermaine Ortiz. How do you think that fight would play out? I think Jermaine would edge him out, but I think Zepeda could take over in the later rounds in that type of fight.
That's really interesting as a fight. Again, for me, from a stylistic perspective, it's got to be a guy that can really hurt Zepeda. So again, I'd want to carry out some film study before committing. But in first thoughts, I'd actually go the other way. I think that it would be a really good boxing display from Ortiz, but the incessant pressure from Zepeda, I think probably starts to wear down Ortiz as the fight goes on. It was the first time we saw Ortiz fight 12 rounds yesterday as well. So who knows if he improves in that regard? Because, listen, the last third of the fight, he lost the entire last third of the fight. Against a guy like Zepeda, that could also happen. And Zepeda is more heavy-handed than Lomachenko. And the volume, although it's a different type of pressure, that you don't have the type of foot pressure and mental pressure that Loma gives, he would set a tempo. So again, would I trust Ortiz in those last 4 rounds to still be strong enough to see the fight out? At the moment, I wouldn't. But having had the experience now of fighting, 12 rounds, who's to know how that stamina develops moving forward? He's certainly a brilliant prospect, Ortiz, and I'd love to see more of him.
Most definitely, most definitely. It's a very intriguing fight. We saw Ortiz had issues with Loma's pressure in the later rounds and his gas tank, and that's one thing that he definitely have a lot of issues with against Zepeda. Francisco Gonzalez says, did you see the kid that got do you see Louis LeBron get robbed, that kid of two stolen fights in a row, ex-Olympics? So, yeah, Duke Reagan. I didn't see that fight, but I heard that was not a very good performance. Duke Reagan impressed me in the Olympics, but it's a shame that he's having issues with a guy like Louis LeBron.
A lot of the times when you're trying to transition as well, we saw it with Ramirez in his first fight, when you're trying to transition from amateur to pro, the rough, I mean, I didn't see this fight on the undercard, I have to confess, but a rougher sort of opponent, and I imagine that's what happened last night, can put you in a situation whereby you're uncomfortable and you're in uncharted territory. And so it's not necessarily a question of a guy not having the ability to adapt. He's just lacking the experience. It's one thing to learn to swim in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. When I then throw you into an ocean with these crazy waves, it doesn't mean you're any less of a swimmer. It's just a different type of challenge, and you have to learn to adapt to that. So it'll be interesting to see whether this is a good learning lesson for the kid.
Yeah, the amateur style is completely different. It's all about volume and outpointing, while the pro style is completely different. You have to pace yourself, pick your shots, and the cleaner, more concise shots. And Reagan's definitely having issues getting used to that style for sure. MB says, where do you guys rank Loma pound for pound, top 15? Yeah, I don't have him in my top 10. I got rid of him from my top 10 list after once he fought Nakatani and Kome and wasn't really going for any belts and wasn't really doing much. After his loss against Tiafimo, I removed him just because so many fighters deserve their spot. I mean, I can't put him above Devin, who's undisputed. I can't really put him against Beterbiev currently. I mean, there's a lot of guys at the end of the top 10 that you could argue he should be above, but I currently top 15 seems fair. Chris, is he on your top 10 or is he in your top 15? Where do you put Loma?
He's not in my top 10. I think, look, it really depends on what your point, your focal point is when it comes to top 10 pound for pound rankings. I think a lot of people are inconsistent with it. In other words, if you're judging, for instance, on paper, sheer achievement, nothing else. Forget the eyeball test. Just what are you achieving on paper? Well, if you're not a champion, you can't be in the top 10. And there are guys that are undisputed, that are unified. They're going to be high up. If, on the other hand, you're looking at other things like, natural ability and dominance and things like that, well, then it's very subjective. And then everyone's going to have views that are all over the place. If you're judging it on, for instance, form, again, your focal point changes. So it really depends on what your focal point is. For me personally, I think Lomachenko, being in the third weight category, natural weight category, he's operating against much bigger guys naturally. So if you're talking about it from that perspective, literally pound for pound where he's at, well, if he was the same size as the other lightweights, in my opinion, he would beat them all, right? So if that's your focal point, then you might have him top 10. But for me, I think I have to look at him now as a settled lightweight, even though he's very small at lightweight. And, I know intellectually he's operating against bigger guys. I have to judge him as a lightweight. And the fact that he doesn't have a belt at the moment, I can't have him in my top 10.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, pound for pound is quite interesting now. There's so many fighters that deserve that spot. We obviously got the obvious guys like Usyk and Crawford and Inouye and all these Devin, Jermel, all these guys, but then you got guys that are like on the edge and either just make it or just miss it, like Arthur Beterbiev, Stephen Fulton, Shakur Stevenson, Kazuto Ioka, Roman Gonzalez, Estrada, Josh Taylor. I mean, the pound for pound list is very stacked right now.
But here's the thing, Max. This is what I mean about consistency, right? Let's say, for instance, you've got Errol Spence in there. The only reason somebody would have Errol Spence is if you're judging the quality of opposition and you feel that he's fought really great fighters and he's got a good CV. Because you can't have him in there based on the fact that he's undisputed, because he's not proven himself to be the king of the division at any point. First Pacquiao was around, then Bud came up. If that's still your focal point, though, and you're saying, I don't care, his CV is strong enough, he's got a better CV than some guys who are undisputed, then I'm having him on there. That's cool. But then if that's your point of focus, you can't have the likes of Devin Haney on there, because Devin Haney hasn't got that deep CV and yet he's undisputed. Exactly. So you've either got to focus on what's on paper, or you've got to look at it and say, I'm going to subjectively analyze the quality of opposition. You see what I'm saying? Exactly. And so I have no problem with what people's pound for pound lists are, as long as they're consistent. And a lot of the times you see a lot of inconsistency.
Favoritism, yeah.
Yeah, favoritism. And that's a lot of it. That's what it is. You know, it's guys with agenda.
Yeah. Who's your number one right now?
For me, it has to be Alexander Usyk, based on the fact that he's got a combination of both achieving something special at cruiserweight and heavyweight, undisputed cruiserweight champion, unified heavyweight champion. He's got that combination with a great CV in terms of the quality of opposition that he's fought. You know, in the United States, I often, and I'm not talking about guys like you, Max, so I know you're very clued up. But generally speaking, when I see views on Twitter, in the US, I think because there's a lack of an American presence at cruiserweight, a lot of American fans undermine the quality of opposition that Usyk beat at cruiserweight. We're talking about some serious guys, right? Top fighters, Briedis, Garcia, really good fighters. And when you add then Anthony Joshua to that as well, you know, you look at it and you say, wow, this dude's got a brilliant CV and he's brilliant on paper. And prior to that, he was, you know, an Olympic gold medalist and an Olympic world gold medalist as well in the amateurs. And on top of all of that, he's done it on the road. You know, everybody gives Haney massive props, and rightly so, for being willing to go to Australia and take that risk. Brilliant from Haney. Usyk has done that every single fight his entire career. He even fought Briedis in Latvia. So, you know,
Garcia in Russia as a Ukrainian.
Exactly. And listen, when you start to add up all those things, you know, for me, Usyk has to be at number one. That's just my personal opinion.
And you know, it's crazy. When I was younger, I was 11 years old. And I even knew when I was 11 and Usyk was going through his run, I made a video when I was way younger saying my favorite weight classes in boxing. And cruiserweight was literally number one in that entire video. I absolutely loved that weight class. You had guys that I was a big fan of, like Gassiev. You had Golovkin. You had Briedis. You had Marco Hook still lingering around. Dorticos. Michael Hunter. Tony Bellew.
And you know what? Well,
Machunu. What was that?
They deserve massive props because they were willing to, all of these guys, get into things like the Boxing Super Series. So these were guys that were not just highly talented. We're not talking about lightweight, which is a fantastic division, but a lot of the guys that are not named Lomachenko, Kambosos, Teofimo, and Haney were sort of not fighting each other. And even Haney, there's question marks about the quality or the depth of his CV. Those guys all entered the Boxing Super Series and said, right, we all believe in ourselves. Let's see who's the king. And when you're talking about a highly talented division where they're all willing to fight each other, that is what makes boxing great, right? So it was,
for sure,
it really was a fantastic division.
Amazing division. And people really underrate some of those wins, like the Gassiev win. That was a very good win. Gassiev, I don't know what happened to his career. Injuries have plagued him, because that was a guy that could have accomplished a lot at heavyweight as well. He still has time, to be fair, but it's going to be very difficult. Let's see. I missed a lot of the chat.
That left hook of Gassiev as well.
Oh, yeah.
That will break the jaws of many heavyweights. He just needs to get more active. I don't know what's going on with the dude. We need to see him in the ring against someone.
I know, and against someone elite as well, for sure. Nordic says if Loma said 130, it would have been way more longevity. For sure, for sure. I think he should have went down, actually, after the Lopez loss. I don't know why he stayed at 135. He should have chased after that Oscar Valdez fight when Valdez had a belt. Could have accomplished a lot, for sure, if he stayed at 130, in my opinion.
You know, you say that, but if he does become undisputed at lightweight, it takes the legacy to a whole new level.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
And he was only one fight away from it.
He can undo all of the criticism we've given him, anyone's given him, if he defeats Devin Haney, if they do fight. But would he? I don't know, man. I mean, as I said, prior to last night's fight, I was picking Loma to defeat Devin. But currently, right now, my gut just tells me Devin's going to walk away with that victory. It's going to be a tough decision, but he's going to end up getting the win.
You know what though, Max, as well, when you're talking about legacy, when you're talking about the great fighters of the past, that the fights that give them that extra status is when they're not expected to win.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
Loma's been
so
the favorite in every fight he's had, so it'd be cool if he could actually pull off an upset, right?
exactly. And that is what adds something new, a new, notch on the bedpost. That's what makes people think, wow, that was something special. So listen, there's a lot on the line for Lomachenko, and I can't hold it against him. I want to praise him for being willing to fight all the best fighters in multiple weight categories. I think that's incredible.
Oh, yeah. Loma's never ducked away from a challenge. Anyone that's ever claimed that's wrong. We know Loma's willing to fight anyone, anytime, anywhere. Quick salute to my boy G-Man Boxing. I've had him on here. Great dude. One of my favorite channels out here. Shout out to him. If you guys haven't, I bet you guys all have. But if you haven't, check out G-Man's channel as well. If Loma can pull off this win against Devin Haney, man, if it does happen, I'd be very happy. I mean, he's never been undisputed. He would be an undisputed champion, first ballot Hall of Famer. It is a winnable fight for Loma. Honestly, I'd say it's like a 55-45 fight for Devin. I think Loma definitely can win it. He has the ability to win it. And Loma is a guy that, to an extent, can raise his level when he raises his opposition. Teofimo Lopez fight aside, when he's fought better opponents, he's looked better, like when he fought Nicholas Walters and Guillermo Rigondeaux. So maybe he can defeat Devin Haney. And if he does, that'd be awesome. But I don't think he will. But I would love to see it. And the fight definitely should happen. That's a fight that may not be the most entertaining, but it's pay-per-view worthy just off of the ability and what it means for the sport. Because if Devin wins, it's a huge win in its own right. MB says, off topic, is Triple G top 15, top 20 pound for pound? I definitely think he's top 15, top 20. I mean, unified champion, beat Murata. Aside from the Canelo losses, I mean, he's been very dominant throughout his career. Yeah, he's top 15, top 20. I don't know what happened in that fight, Chris, against Canelo. That was a very weird fight, a very off fight. I'm not going to get all as quote-unquote conspiracies people say, but Nordic Warrior made a very good video about his thoughts in the fight and how it seemed a little bit off. That's all I'll say. It's almost like they told Triple G behind the scenes, give away the first half of the fight, then you could kind of try later on, because it was very weird how that fight played out. It was very off. Did not have the same vibe as the first two fights, and he almost got the decision as well. It was just such a weird fight. Didn't make any sense. It's a very forgettable fight. People didn't really talk about it that much. What'd you think of that fight? How'd you score it as well? Triple G and Canelo 2 or 3?
I think I had it. Was it 9-3, I think, to Canelo? I thought Canelo won comfortably. I think what happened with Triple G there is a case of him feeling the firepower early on. And listen, we can say it should have been like the first couple of fights, but he's 40 years old. Yeah. And the body, as it ages, you don't absorb as much punishment in the same way that you used to absorb it. I did my own sort of technical breakdown video of the preview of the fight, and I focused on round 12 of their rematch, their second fight. And a lot of people who used to say, oh, Golovkin's got no special effects, he's a basic fighter. I was basically trying to debunk that and showing exactly how technical he was in that 12th round. And that's how I felt he needed to approach the fight if he was going to win the fight. But that required him just to be just in the pocket or on the edge of range, just coming outside enough to then step back inside and change the angles. And I showed in the 12th round of that second fight, when I did this video, how he's more than capable of doing that. Golovkin is not this brawler that people portray him to be. He's an elite level boxer. But I also explained in my prediction for that video that I just don't think he's able to do that anymore. And when he was stepping out of the pocket as Canelo was launching his individual big pot shots, he would often turn off at the shoulder and jump out of range to take something off of those shots, but wasn't coming back in quickly enough. And so it just felt to me as though he was stopping Canelo from really applying serious pressure and damaging him, but there wasn't enough coming back from Golovkin himself. And, at 40 years old, I can sort of understand it. I still think he's going to be a major problem for a lot of the middleweights. Oh, yeah. But again, it's not the Golovkin of old. Even the Golovkin that fought Canelo Alvarez the first couple of times, you could argue that was Golovkin past his best. He was
it was to an extent.
Right. And again, I did a video, Max, back then, prior to the first fight, where I was actually speaking about, and this was before any signs of him losing to Canelo, before the first fight they had, I was saying how there was a slight slowing down of his foot speed.
The Jacobs fight and the Kell Brook fight. Those are two fights. I think that the Kell Brook fight's the first time I really started to see a slight shift.
Well, even that's what I was going to say. Even before the Jacobs fight, and I didn't wait for that controversy. I felt that his feet slowed slightly, especially when you compare him compared to the Golovkin that fought Proxer or the Golovkin in the amateurs. So again, I'll go back to that analogy I used earlier. When you're at the top of Everest and you're on your way down, 2 kilometers down the mountain, you're still on top of the world, but you're not quite what you were. And, Golovkin was just declining slightly. And now I just think we're way past that point where he was at his peak. And I think that's what we saw in the third fight, personally.
You know what I think the biggest thing in the third fight was that just Triple G and Jonathan Banks had a horrendous game plan. Them attempting to outbox Canelo. I mean, yes, he was a good fundamental boxer in the amateurs, but that was so long ago. Triple G, what gave Canelo the most issues is when he was pushing him back. Triple G in his career, the only guys that really were able to give Triple G issues were the guys that were able to push Triple G back, not vice versa. When Triple G is coming forward and pressuring, no guy's really been able to do much against him. Because Jacobs, when he was on the back foot, Triple G looked comfortable. But when Jacobs came forward with Triple G, he had a tougher fight. The first Canelo fight, when Triple G was coming forward, he won quite clearly. The second fight was much tougher, and Canelo went head on and tried pushing Triple G back. When he pressured Canelo in the second half of the fight and pushed him back, he looked much more comfortable, was winning much more rounds, and looked way better. The game plan, in my opinion, is what lost him the fight. He took too long to get going, and he adjusted late, and he still almost got a draw on the scores, which is kind of ironic. But he hit the game plan, in my opinion, is what lost him the fight. You know, actually, what's crazy, I would actually pick Triple G to defeat Charlo and Andre at 160. People might call me crazy. I would definitely pick him to beat Andre. The Charlo fight is the fight where I'd have to really think about it. Styles make fights. I think he'd beat Andre quite clearly.
I think, I mean, look, it also depends on what we've got left of Andre, because he too has shown signs of decline. I think Aleem Kanuli is looking very, very good as well at 160. So, you know, I do think regardless of what happens, regardless of whether he beats one guy, maybe two guys, his days are numbered. He's at the end of his career now. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's that one last hurrah and he does something special again at middleweight.
Oh, I would love to see that, especially because Triple G is my favorite fighter. Francisco says, what do you guys think about Subriel Matias? I don't see anybody in the division taking that relentless pressure, and Triple G's maybe top 20. Oh, I definitely like Subriel Matias. He's a very interesting fighter. That Ponce fight hopefully happens soon because that would be a good matchup. And yeah, Subriel Matias is definitely one of the dark horses at 140. Very entertaining fighter, ruthless, good, very good power, very good chin, great gas tank. What do you think about Subriel Matias and how he does at 140? 140 he fights at, right? How would you think he does?
I agree with you. I agree with your take on it. I think he's a very talented fighter. And yeah, another one that we need to be keeping an eye out for. There are so many great fighters at the moment coming through, great talents. But it's one thing to have potential and it's another thing to fulfill it. There's always that gap. Okay. And so a lot of the guys that we're talking about now is potentially be in the future. In a few years from now, we'll be saying, hey, you remember that guy that we were talking about and he wouldn't have fulfilled his potential. There'll be some other guys who maybe at the moment we're overlooking and they'll be the ones to step up too. So, you know, exciting times ahead in the sport.
For sure, for sure. Nordic says Triple G was scared of the counter punches, the head movement, and the defense. Oh, yeah, for sure. Just like Jacobs, man. Nice to see Loma slipping phage. I don't see him at the top much longer. Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, he could have that last hurrah against Devin. That's honestly, Devin or Shakur, I honestly think those are very likely his next fights. Bob Arum knows that Loma doesn't have too much time left before these big fights don't become so big anymore. If he can defeat Devin or defeat Shakur, he should just retire after that. End his career with a massive victory. Be a great way to say goodbye to the sport. Let's see. Yeah, and B says Robesi looks solid. I wonder how he'll do against Dogbe. Yeah, me and Chris were talking about this earlier. We both think Robesi would defeat Dogbe. It's a bit of a shame Navarrete is moving up in weight. Yes, him versus Valdez is going to be an awesome fight. So it's not a shame. But it's a shame that we're going to miss out on some intriguing fights at 126, like Navarrete versus Ramirez. I think that fight would have been very difficult for Navarrete if he fought Robesi. I think he may have won it, but it wouldn't have been easy at all. Best up-and-coming fighters at 147 and 135. Obviously, we got Ennis, we got Virgil, we got Stanionis. Connor Ben's at a weird spot right now, so I'm not going to really mention him too much. We got Ratza Butaev's a very slept-on guy. Yes, he lost to Stanionis, but I think he's actually a better fighter than Stanionis. I think he gives these guys tougher fights than Stanionis because he's so physically strong and physically imposing. I think that's a guy that definitely deserves more praise and more credit. 135. There's a lot of guys at 135 as well. I'm blanking out right now. Does Keyshawn fight at 135? Keyshawn Davis?
Lemos is another one who I think at 135, by the way, is a real pressure fighter, a really tough guy. And I was saying today on Twitter that Lemos and Zepeda could provide a fight of the year sort of candidate fight for me. You know, two guys that are both ranked in top 10 now by BoxRec. 135 is smoking in terms of depth. I agree with you also, by the way, regarding Boots Ennis. The problem with Boots is that he's so inactive. And that can really stunt a guy. That can hurt a guy. That can hurt a guy's development. And that's going to be an area that they're really going to have to look at. We know that, you know, there are all these rumors about the PBC at the moment and things like that. Whatever the case might be, they need to find a way to be getting Boots active, because the last thing he needs in these developmental years is ring rust, you know?
For sure. Yeah. And even when he does fight, he's taking these guys out in 1 or 2 rounds. So he's not really getting much in these fights. You know what I think they might do? They might make Boots versus my friend who I've had on the channel, Cody Crowley. The guy just dominated Josito Lopez for a wide decision. That's a good fight for Ennis. Cody Crowley's tough. He's a good pressure fighter. He's undefeated. He's hungry. That'd be a very tough, not a tough fight, but that'd be a very good experience fight for Ennis. It's a lot of fights that they can make for him. Him versus Ratsa Butayev, as I mentioned. That would be a very intriguing fight for Ennis. Him versus
a fight I would love to see, Max, and nobody talks about this dude because he's been, maybe not the most exciting fighter, but Yelusinov is still a top class boxer.
Oh yeah, I miss Yelusinov. It's been a very long time. He's a dark horse as well, but it's a shame. He actually said he's contemplating retirement because he can't get any fights, which is a big shame because he does have a lot of natural ability.
He has apparently agreed to fight someone, so that's not going to happen now. But the point is, he was a free agent. He was actually begging Al Heyman. He was saying, please sign me up. I'd love the opportunity to fight some of your guys. I'm here. I'm available. So, I'm hoping that somebody gives this guy a chance again because, a lot of these boxers, this idea that you have to be ultra exciting and, a come forward pressure fighter and looking to knock everybody out in order to get on, a platform and be given an opportunity. I think it's quite a very modern method of looking at things. We've got to start to appreciate the boxer punchers. Look at Dmitry Bivol. He was a guy that was going under the radar until he got his opportunity, and now all of a sudden everybody loves Dmitry Bivol.
Yeah, of course.
So I'd love to see Yelusinov in there. And if Boots Ennis was to beat a guy like him, from the hardcore boxer's perspective, people would look at that and say, right, he's come onto the scene now because this might not be the household name, but we all know the level of Yelusinov, and that would be a really big scalp to have on the resume. So, I'd love to see him in with someone like him. Yeah,
that's a fight I'd definitely like to see. Yelusinov is very underrated, very solid. He hasn't gotten the opportunities yet, but assuming he does, I do think he will capitalize on them. Another guy who's kind of like Yelusinov, he gets a lot more attention from the hardcore and casual boxing fan, but he's still in a similar boat, is Rashidi Ellis. I mean, Rashidi Ellis is another guy that's very solid. He beat Alexis Rocha, who's on a bit of a tear right now. He has good speed, good fundamentals. That would be another interesting match as well. I think Boots would defeat him, but it'd be a good fight as well. A lot of guys that they can make. Personally, if I'm PBC, I'm putting him in with Butayev, just because Butayev has that. First of all, Butayev is entertaining, so we know the fight will be entertaining. Second of all, we know that Butayev, he's a bit of he's a very intriguing guy when you look at him, because he's this guy that has like this almost intimidating way of fighting where he'd beat down these opponents, he'd hurt them. He's a bit of a savage in the ring, and it'd be very interesting if Boots could destroy Butayev and like put him away early and embarrass him. That would be a really good look for Ennis.
And also, Butayev is a really aggressive body puncher, so that's another really good experience for a guy like Boots Ennis to come in the ring. And as you say, Butayev's nickname, if I'm not mistaken, is No Mercy, right? No Mercy Butayev. So he is a guy that will bring it. So yeah, I'd be happy to see that as well as a fight, and it would be another fight where I believe it would be a step up to anything Boots has faced so far.
For sure.
See, the thing is with Jaron Ennis, he's a brilliant fighter. There's no doubt about it. He would have a chance against anybody in the division. But we are still talking about a guy who's yet to have any sort of even a B-rate level win at the moment. Not really, in my opinion anyway. And we see this with a lot of guys who are fantastic fighters in the United States, but there's almost like this level of being risk averse from the promoters. I mean, what is David Benavidez' best win, for instance?
Probably Durrell.
Right. And Durrell,
not saying much, is it?
Right. And Anthony Durrell's way past his best. Couple of fights before that, he had a very close fight against Avni
Dennis Douglas as well.
Yeah, exactly. And no disrespect to these guys. They're wily old vets, wily old dogs. But like I said, he got through a 10-round win over Avni Yildirim, where it was a head clash. So they went to the scorecards. A couple of the judges only had them 2 points apart. So the fight's still up in the air. Well, Avni Yildirim, a fight after that, went and lost at British domestic level to Jack Cullen.
Yeah.
So
he's lost again, actually. I think it was in Turkey against some random. So
well, there you go. So we all appreciate the level of Benavidez, the level of guys like Caleb Plant, Boots Ennis. They're very talented fighters. But there comes a point where we have to stop being subjective and just saying, these are great fighters. They have to start getting in the ring and doing something in terms of getting big names on the CV for them to really earn their shots. I mean, that's how I see it anyway.
Agreed. It's a shame boxing is becoming in a state where these fighters are fighting the easiest opponents that they possibly can. I mean, Benavidez versus Jose Uzcategui is a joke, a complete joke. There's no reason why him and Plant aren't fighting next. And if he isn't going to fight Plant, why isn't he attempting to fight David Morrell? That would be a good fight. Why isn't he? David Morrell's fighting a much better opponent than David Benavidez is fighting. He's fighting I don't remember how to pronounce the dude's name. Ido something. I don't know how to say his last name. It's too difficult for me to pronounce. But he's very good amateur pedigree, undefeated, great pedigree, very talented fighter. He's fighting a much better opponent than David Benavidez is fighting, and that speaks volumes because Morrell's 7-0.
I mean, consider this. This Gato guy, he lost to Lionel Thompson. Since then, he's beaten the likes of Obando, Hernandez Lopez, and Romero. Now, Hernandez Lopez was 9-4. The other two, Obando was 20, 28-2, and Romero is 21, 19-1. And in between that time, in 2021, he also failed a PED test for synthetic EPO. So you're looking at these opponents that Benavidez is facing. And listen, like I said, I'm a fan of Benavidez's talents and abilities. But if you're talking about wanting that Canelo shot, all these guys are lining up for that payday. You got to start fighting each other. When Andrade said that he wanted to fight Benavidez, why is Benavidez's manager coming out and saying, we want 7 million? What are you talking about? These sorts of things, Max, until fans start calling them out, instead of fans saying, listen, this is my guy, I'm going to be tribal and find an excuse to back him. Until that stops, we're always going to have this problem. If you are a fan of boxing and you believe in your guy, well, then you should believe in him and his abilities to overcome the guys that are beneath the elite in order to get a shot at the elite. And the other thing as well, you're doing your fighter a disservice, because what happens is if you have a fighter who's not really beaten anyone, but he has a good reputation, he steps up and then loses at the elite. The only thing that's going to happen is that people are going to say, he was overrated. He was a hype job. So long term, you're hurting him anyway. Let him build his career properly.
Exactly. For sure. What's the most tragic part about this? I actually think David Benavidez would defeat Canelo right now. Canelo's on the decline as well. People aren't talking about. He's smaller. Benavidez, yes, his opposition hasn't been great, but we see the strength, the power, the speed, the athleticism, the hunger. He has it all to defeat Canelo Alvarez. He's way bigger than Canelo Alvarez. He's not like Plant bigger where he's just taller. He is bigger than Canelo Alvarez. You will outweigh him by maybe 20 to 30 pounds if they fought. I would pick him to defeat Canelo, but we'll never know if that fight never happens. And at least, say what you're about to say.
No, I was going to say, and the thing is, Max, you may very well be right. I do want to put that out there. I'm not trying to undermine the level of Benavidez. Stylistically, he's potentially a serious problem for Canelo. All those things you said apply, as well as one more thing. Canelo has shown some stamina issues whereby he fights in bursts. Benavidez is a sort of guy that is a size guy, but applies incessant pressure and has very fast hands. In those areas where Canelo's going to want to take a portion of a round off just to recover, Benavidez is going to put it on him. So there's no doubt in my mind that he has the capability of potentially beating Canelo. But for you to be able to demand that shot, for you to say, I deserve it more than Charlo, I deserve it more than Caleb Plant, more than whoever else is there, Andre, all these guys, you've got to do something to make yourself stand out. Do you see what I'm saying, Max?
Exactly.
And that's what I find so frustrating.
Yeah, none of these guys, and I'm not trying to be like you have to earn your shot to fight Canelo, because of course, if the fans want to see it should happen, but you guys are doing nothing. You guys, if you're not going to fight Canelo, at least for the fans, fight each other. Why isn't Benavidez, Charlo, and Plant, they're all PBC. They're all willing to fight at 168. They're all hungry, good fighters. Why are none of these fighters blending in and fighting each other? I would be completely happy if we got either Benavidez versus Charlo or Plant versus Charlo. Any of those fights would be awesome.
And also, Max, what people don't realize is, let's say for argument's sake, you are a Benavidez fan and you are 100% sure that Benavidez will beat Canelo Alvarez, and you think that Canelo wants to duck him because in your mind you think Canelo knows he's going to lose to him. Well, if Canelo turns around and says, why would I fight this guy? He's not fought anybody. He has an out. And nobody can say he's ducking, really, because Canelo will say, well, who's Benavidez for? In other words, if you put yourself in a position where you beat another top contender, let's say he was to beat Caleb Plant and he was to do it in better fashion than Canelo did it. Exactly. Well, then all of a sudden, people can't say, Canelo, what do you mean who's he for? He beat a guy that you beat in better fashion. You need to give this dude his shot.
And then it looks like Canelo's ducking,
Exactly. You see what I'm saying? So we need to see these guys operating against each other. And if all the rumors about the PBC struggling a bit financially are true, and they may not be, but if they're true, then surely they would benefit from their guys fighting each other as well.
Exactly. That's probably why they've been struggling. If you make the fights that we want to see, you will get viewership. If Caleb Plant and David Benavidez fought, pay-per-view or not, let's say it's pay-per-view, it will do much more buys than their recent pay-per-view fights. I'll say that much. If it's on free TV, it will blow everything else out the water. That fight would
100%.
do massive. And yes, they may lose a little bit of a cash cow. So because whoever loses that fight, their stock might go down. That's not even a guarantee. Because say Plant gets stopped by Benavidez, right? But what if he gives him a great fight, gives him a war, lands, is up on the cards, looks phenomenal, goes, fights like a warrior and gives it his all. Plant can still be a big money fighter for PBC if he loses to Benavidez, and vice versa. If Benavidez loses a decision where it's a war, a battle. So there's a good chance they wouldn't even lose their cash cow, and they would get a lot of money, and they can set up a Canelo Alvarez fight. Canelo fight would be much more likely for David Benavidez if he beat Caleb Plant. It would make all the sense.
Here's the other thing as well. Let's say Plant was to fight Benavidez and he was to get stopped. For argument's sake, this idea that an L should then define your career and your stock falls massively, it shouldn't be the case. What happens if after that Plant starts trash talking with Andrade or Charlo? What? That's another fight you're not going to want to see just because he lost to Benavidez. Of course you will. You see what I'm saying? So, you look at the greats of the past. Sugar Ray Robinson lost an obscene amount of fights, yet he's considered to be, by many people, the best of all time. I can't remember the exact sort of ratio. They were obviously a lot more active back then. But I think, if I remember rightly, he averaged something like one loss every 7 or 8 fights or something crazy like that. There were so many losses to the wins, but because the level of opposition was high, people were saying it doesn't matter if you lose that because of the amount of big wins you've got. That's what gives you the legacy. It's not the record.
Exactly.
It's the big wins.
You're defined by your wins more than you are by your losses.
Exactly.
No one remembers who Sugar Ray. No one cares about Sugar Ray Leonard losing his last couple fights in his career. What we remember is the Tommy Hearns fight, the Rand fights, and so on.
Exactly.
We don't care.
I was going to give the Cotto example, Max. No one's talking about Cotto losing to Saddam Ali. You remember the big fights and the big nights. Do you see what I'm saying?
The Shane Mosley's, the Margaritos, exactly.
Exactly.
So Cam Mentions a good up-and-comer named Muhammad Rabi or Rabbi. He's an amateur beat Yulisanov and Josh Kelly, turned pro in Germany, and are trying to get him abroad. It's at 147 at 155. Very interesting guy. I'll make sure to check him out if I can. Aaron says a 6-man tournament for 135, 147, 168. I'm going to make a quick 6-man tournament for 135. So we got Devin Haney. He'll be the first seed because he's undisputed, right? We're assuming he's going to stay at 135.
Max, there's too many. You have to make it a top 8.
Yeah.
Finals.
Yeah, because if it's 6, it's uneven also. Okay, so we got Haney. We got Loma. We got Ryan Garcia. So that's 3 right there. We got, what's his name? We just fought last night. Man, I'm blanking out. It's crazy. Zepeda. We got Zepeda. We got Shakur moving up, so we could put Shakur up there as well. We got, we would give Jermaine Ortiz another spot, so that's 6. I don't want to mispick. Who else?
Would we believe that Tank would go in there?
Yeah, we'd put Tank in there for sure. Definitely Tank. And then we have one more available slot.
Well, for me, to be honest with you, I'd go with Kambosos, but I could put in Lemos in there as well.
I'd put I'd give Kambosos his opportunity, but he'd be like I wouldn't put him 8th seed because obviously we don't want to see Devin fight him again, right? That would be.
But here's the thing though, as well, Max. Right? Of course, we would not want to see him fight Devin. But the truth is, if we go back to what we were just saying a moment ago about his big wins that count, Kambosos has a bigger win on his resume than most of those dudes, and so
bigger win than Loma, if we're being honest.
Right. So I don't hold it against the guy for being willing to take a risk and falling short against the guy who stylistically is all wrong for him. Let's say, for argument's sake, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this show, let's say that Devin Haney is far too big for Lomachenko. He's naturally too big, and he wins the fight comfortably. Nobody will then write off Lomachenko and say he's just a fraud. I mean, nobody who's sane would anyway. We would still want to see Lomachenko in there against a Tank Davis if it was to be announced. So why do we then write off a guy like Kambosos, who has beaten the likes of Teofimo Lopez, beat a couple of world champions on the road? In other words, I want to give the dude his props because he's earned it. Whereas people put Isaac Cruz on a pedestal, for instance, he's not achieved anything near to what Kambosos has.
Not even close, yeah.
Tank Davis, who everybody puts on a pedestal, a tremendous fighter. In terms of the eyeball test, yes, he's very possibly an elite level fighter. But we're judging it on subjectivity and eyeball test because he's not beaten a really top guy since he beat Pedraza, which was a great win back then. But since then, Leo Santa Cruz has passed his best, Gamboa, who has been the signature win for Tank? And yet we're willing to put Tank on a pedestal. So for me, I've got always a lot more respect and I rate him a lot higher, Kambosos this is, than most other people do because of what he's done on paper.
He fought 3 great opponents in a row, so you definitely got to give him credit for that. So my question is, who's going to be our 8th seed? Do you want it to be Zepeda? Who else did we mention? There's a few others. It would be Devin Haney for the first fight versus, I guess, Zepeda. Is that what we're going to do here? I mean, that's not a fun first fight.
That would be brilliant. I'd love to see that one.
That would be an awesome fight. I mean, obviously I'd pick Devin, but I mean, Zepeda has more potential, we realize, because if he can keep up that pace and be that comfortable against all these opponents, he's a nightmare for anyone. I mean, I'd probably pick Devin, but it would not be easy. It would be a tough decision, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be very interested in that.
Actually, Jermaine Ortiz is also in this tournament, so maybe we'll have Jermaine Ortiz against Devin for the first round.
Yeah, Jermaine Ortiz versus Devin. We could have Zepeda Cambosos. That would be a war.
That would be
a war. Two guys would go for it.
I would pick Devin to defeat Jermaine 9-3, something in that range.
Right, interesting. I'd like to see it. I mean, look, I've got to analyze a bit more of Jermaine Ortiz, but from what I have seen of him, he's a little bit more awkward in some regards than Haney in some ways. He switch hits a lot. He's more aggressive, I think, than Devin Haney. But I think Devin Haney is a better fighter at range. And so it will be interesting to see if Ortiz would be willing to switch it up more and become a much more aggressive sort of fighter whereby he forces his way in.
It would have to be, yeah.
Yeah, so...
I got Devin advancing the second round.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, me too. But I mean, I don't know who would you have coming out on top rather than predicting each individual fight because we don't know what the draw would be like.
Yeah.
If you had an 8-man tournament like that, who would be your favorite to come out on top?
Honestly, I think I would honestly have to go with Shakur. I think I'd go Shakur. Especially because Devin's having issues making 135. I think I'd edge out Shakur. I feel like the final four would be Shakur, Devin, Loma, and Tank. Tank's getting outboxed by all three of them except for maybe Devin. I think he might. I actually think Tank would beat Devin, which is a hot take, to be honest. I think it'd probably be Loma and Shakur. That would be a tough fight. I think Shakur would edge out, and I think Shakur would beat Tank by a decision. I would go Shakur Stevenson going all the way 135. What do you think?
See, I'm such a believer in Styles making fights. For me, it's all about the draw. I don't really see boxing as levels whereby I think this guy would without a doubt beat this guy. I really do see it as a question of style.
So let's say Devin's 1 seed, Shakur's 2 seed, Loma's 3 seed, and Tank is 4 seed. So it would be Devin versus Tank. I would go with Tank.
So Devin has proven to be a little bit vulnerable at times, and Tank can fight a little bit like Jojo Diaz, whereby he is got a high guard and he walks you down, but he's a lot more explosive and a bigger puncher than Jojo Diaz. And Diaz did hurt, or I can't say he really hurt him, but he had his moments against Haney where he bugged him a little bit. Tank would be the sort of guy who I think would be behind on the scorecards going into those championship rounds, but as Devin Haney starts to slow, who knows if Tank could land something big. If we're going from the perspective of probability, I would have to go with Devin Haney because if you need a knockout with 3 rounds to go, who's to say you're going to get it? But it's one of those where I don't think you'd be able to take your eyes off it until the final bell. Tank's got the ability to turn it around in any given moment. But personally, I think Haney would be the favorite. Interesting.
So you would favor Haney over Tank. I would favor Tank. So we can mix up the final match. And Shakur versus Loma, we've gone back and forth. I think I would edge out Shakur to win that one.
At this stage of their careers, I would go Shakur.
So for you have a much more, I'd say more talked about match because Haney versus Shakur has been talked about for a while. Who would you pick between Haney and Shakur?
That is a really difficult fight for me because, again, extremely, because what I consider to be the weakness of Devin Haney, like I said, styles make fights to me. To me, it's forcing your way into the pocket and forcing him to exchange when you are a big puncher and you can hurt him. I'm not sure, as talented as Shakur Stevenson is, I'm not sure he's got the sort of power where he's going to be able to really trouble Haney in that regard. So then it becomes a straight boxing match. And these guys know each other. They've sparred. They're very familiar with each other. It's one of those that I genuinely think could go either way.
It's a very good fight. I personally would pick Shakur Stevenson. Any chance, have you seen their sparring session on YouTube when they were much younger?
I've not, but
you should watch.
I need to check that out. How
it's
much
very interesting. I believe it was 2016 or 17. But
right, see, that's one thing.
Yeah, exactly. But still, it was such an interesting thing to watch, and everyone in the comments were so split in who they actually thought got the better of it. For me, I think Shakur nicked it, but they were going hard on each other. I mean, there was a big crowd in the Mayweather gym. They were trying. And even though they've improved a lot, both fighters, I still think it's definitely a good watch for sure.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, without having seen it, so I'm almost talking blindly here, but I think if you're looking at the trajectory, the growth of the two fighters, I actually think Haney has improved a lot more in terms of trajectory than Shakur has. That doesn't necessarily mean he's surpassed him. He might not be as good as him. I'm not saying that. But I think the Devin Haney that fought Jojo Diaz, so even as recent as that, is not the Devin Haney that fought George Kambosos in the second fight. I think Devin Haney now has managed to add new wrinkles to his game from an offensive perspective and switching that offense to defense and being able to slip out of range a lot more effectively than he used to. There were other points where when he'd get tired, he wouldn't be as disruptive to the opponent's rhythm. He would almost just stand there and try to roll with shots, and he'd be a sitting duck. So if it was that close back in 2016, in Devin Haney's mind, I can imagine him thinking, listen, you were an Olympian, right? You were a guy that, you know, in the amateurs, you were very highly rated. I've improved a lot more even since then. So I would have closed the gap. Listen, it's a chess match. It's a chess match.
Definitely.
It would depend on the details for me.
It would be a very interesting fight for sure. But we got to keep in mind, Devin is having issues making 135. Now, he looked his best, in my opinion, against George, which is kind of ironic, right? But he looked very sharp in that rematch, much better offensively than the first fight. Even then, the fact that he's having so much issues cutting weight and the fact that Shakur will be much more hydrated for at 135, I would edge out Shakur to defeat Devin personally. Now, Shakur versus Tank is a completely different fight, which has many ways of going because Tank may just overpower him, right? He may not respect Shakur's power, may just come in and beat him up and knock him out. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Shakur's going to outbox Tank, and I think he's actually going to win much wider than people realize.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like I always say, I'm always tentative about making predictions without doing film study because if I then change my prediction, people come at me. But from first thoughts, I would favor Shakur, yeah.
Shakur. So you have Devin going all the way, right? Hypothetically. I mean, this is very difficult, but
I think Shakur is I think Loma, if all the guys were the same size and they were all
such
youthful,
a tough call.
I think Loma's the top guy. If we're talking about they're all the best, at their best, all youthful, but I don't think Lomachenko is at his best anymore. So with that in mind, if you're talking about all of them now, I think the best of them in terms of sheer ability is Shakur Stevenson. But because I believe that styles make fights, and based on that, I don't typically look at Shakur's style as being majorly problematic for Devin Haney. That's not to say he can't outbox him, but where I see Haney's weaknesses aren't really in line with where I see Shakur's strengths. So It's one of those whereby I think that Devin Haney's the bigger guy. He's fought, at a higher weight category. They're going to be fighting at the weight category that he's been in. And although a lot of people talk about him struggling to make the weight, he himself said, I feel very good at this weight. So it could just be aesthetic that he ends up, having a drawn sort of gaunt face. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. It's a pick'em. But let me just say this, just to add one more thing. I actually think that Shakur Stevenson potentially, how you doing, Rex? I think Shakur Stevenson potentially has a better ceiling in the sense that with Devin Haney, I think there's an element of vulnerability there. And because he uses his range a lot, if he goes up to 147 one day or 140, imagine him in against a guy like Josh Taylor, who can get inside and can seriously roughhouse you, or a guy like Regis Prograis, who can really batter that body and change the course of a fight with an individual punch. Well, he's more likely, Prograis, to find that shot against the Devin Haney than he is against the Shakur Stevenson.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
It's extremely intriguing. That's all I'll say. It's very talented. They both have they have similar styles, but completely different strengths. It's basically, I mean, if this fight happened, it would be such a tough I would say that's a more 50-50 fight than Crawford Spence. I actually would. Not even for me, but off the fans, because the fans would be very stumped. Now, he asked up for 147 a tournament, so we're gonna make this simple. We'll just do 4, right? Because we'll just do the top 4 guys. We know the top 4. It's Crawford, Spence, Ennis, and Ortiz, right? So I would put, just because of titles, I'll put Spence first seed, Crawford second, Boots third, and Virgil fourth. So you got Spence versus Ortiz in the first round. I think Spence would defeat Virgil right now.
Yeah, I think he would beat Virgil right now.
Yeah, I don't even think we need to get too deep into that breakdown. It'd be a tough fight, but he does everything a little bit better than Virgil right now. Crawford and Boots is the one where we really have to contemplate.
Look, I believe that although Boots is highly talented, brilliant fighter, we have yet to see him even against a B-level guy.
Or in deep waters. He's never been in deep waters.
Exactly. And one of the things with Bud he's so adjustable. He's arguably the most adjustable fighter in the sport. You've seen him have problems in terms of being outboxed against Gamboa early in the fight, Kell Brook early in the fight, and he has this ability. Benavidez had a lot of
Even
success.
Sean Porter, to an extent, he was getting outworked a little bit early on.
Right. And then he has that ability to switch it up. He's able to go orthodox, southpaw, box off the back foot, the front foot. He's able to set up a big, powerful shot where he starts to sit in the pocket and throw these wide looping hooks. And you're thinking he's there to be hit. And his understanding of distance and levels is so good that people aren't landing flush on him. When you've got a guy that's that adjustable, has that sort of killer instinct and can take a guy out and is proven in that regard, it's very difficult for me to say I'm picking Boots. He's got the athletic attributes and he's got great skills where I wouldn't be stunned if he was to beat Bud. But I have to go with Bud as the favorite. Do you see what I mean?
I agree. What I think would happen in that fight is I think Boots would start extremely strong. He'd actually be dominating Crawford early, and I think Crawford would slowly break him down. I think by round 9 or 10, Boots will be up on the cards, but Crawford would have figured them out, and I think Crawford will get a come from behind stoppage in that fight. That's how I see it playing out. So now we got the main one, the fight that everyone's sick of talking about, but for the tournament's sake, Spence and Crawford. I actually don't know who you're picking in that fight, Chris.
You see, I've kept this one quiet because I'm going to do a technical breakdown on my video when it comes. But what I will say is I do think it's a pick 'em fight. I'm not going to give you my prediction, Max, but I do want to hear yours.
Okay, so I've always stuck with the same guy. And this fight was rumored and discussed since 2015 because Spence was on the rise and Crawford was going to move up in weight soon. Not right away, but 140 was pretty dead, and everyone wanted to see how Crawford would do at 147. I've stuck with my guy, and I'm going to continue sticking with him. Nothing has changed my mind. I am picking Crawford to win this fight in a very tough but deserved decision. A lot of people are picking Crawford to stop Errol. I don't think he'd stop Errol. Errol, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated chins in the sport. Very good chin. He's bigger. He's stronger. Crawford, he rises to the competition, but Errol does as well. Errol adjusts very well. He's not going to let Crawford stop him. I think Crawford's going to box more in this fight, but I think he's going to show a lot of aggression as well. It's going to be a mixed performance. I think after 12 rounds, it'll be a tough fight, and Crawford will edge him out. I'm picking Crawford to win that fight. It's a shame. It's probably never going to happen until Crawford's 37 years old. So by the time he's 37, my opinion might change. It's kind of a shame because my two favorite fighters, hypothetically, if Crawford loses to Errol, my two favorite fighters would have been aged out in defeat. Triple G with Canelo and Crawford of Errol, but that's just the way that the game goes, I guess. But if it happens now, happens 2023, I got Crawford defeating Errol Spence.
Again, one thing I will say just to add to that, when you're talking about legacy, you don't want to be in a position if you're Errol Spence, whereby you win that fight, it's your career-defining fight. And in 10, 15 years from now, when people are looking back at it, they're saying, great win, but...
He was old.
Yeah. But, right, you don't want that but to there. But he was old, but he was past his best. Make the fight happen, guys. This is the reason you got into boxing. You've both made a lot of money. So it's not as though, you have to try and find a way to build your careers and you're worried about losing. You're both coming to the point where, you're reaching the second half of your careers now, the latter part of your careers. Make that fight because these are
just make it already.
That people will remember you for. Do
you think the winner of that fight's pound for pound number one, assuming Usyk and Fury still don't fight as well? I would say the winner of this fight.
No, because based on my thought process behind it, Bud may very well be. Because like I said,
not as much for you.
No, and it's got nothing to do with Spence not being a great fighter, but it just goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the show about the definitions of pound for pound. For me, you have to prove, firstly, that you are the top guy in your own weight category. He would have done that. But if you're talking about comparing him to other guys that have proven to be top guys in the weight categories above, well then,
he's only one weight champion. I mean, Usyk did what Spence did and became a 3-belt champion at heavyweight and upsetting Anthony Joshua. If Usyk defeats Tyson Fury, man, I really want that fight to happen, and we know Usyk would make it happen. If Usyk defeated Tyson Fury, hypothetically, if that fight happened, Usyk would be one of the greatest fighters in I'd say best fighter in this generation, one of the greatest fighters in modern boxing history. I mean, that would be incredible.
I think he's already that, to be honest with you, Max. I think he's a certified Hall of Famer. Listen, Max, just to reiterate, Olympic gold medalist, amateur world gold medalist, undisputed cruiserweight champion, unified heavyweight champion, all on the road, never having lost. That is an incredible CV.
And, Usyk, has he ever beaten a fighter? I apologize for cutting you off. Aside from Marco Huck, has he beaten any fighter that wasn't in their prime? No one ever thinks about that. Tony Bellew was peak, and some people say Tony Bellew was peaking when he fought Usyk. That was the best Tony Bellew was prior. That he had his best career wins. Garcia undefeated in his prime. Bradis undefeated in his prime. Golovkin undefeated in his prime. Hunter undefeated in his prime. Geez, Anthony Joshua, I don't care about the Ruiz loss. He was still in his prime. Let's not pretend he wasn't.
Exactly. I mean, if he goes on to beat Tyson Fury, if somebody then, and I'm not saying this would be the case, I'm not telling you this is a fact, but if somebody was to turn to me and say to me, I think Usyk's the best ever. For me, he's the best pound fighter of all time. I'm not going to laugh at that comment. I wouldn't say you're wrong, because when you look at the great fighters of the past and you look at only one guy in history became undisputed cruiserweight champion and then undisputed heavyweight champion. That was Evander Holyfield.
Yeah.
So that's how rare this is. You know, people often forget, because jumping up from cruiserweight to heavyweight might only be 2 weight categories. But because there's no limit to the heavyweight division, when you're fighting a guy like Tyson Fury, who's so massive, it's almost like you're jumping more than 1 weight category, right?
Yeah.
So to go and do these sorts of things, amateur and pro on the road against guys that were in their peak, in their primes, you develop a level of legacy that is just elite. You become in the conversation for being the best of all time. And because I'm a guy that counts big wins rather than records, let's say he fought Fury twice and he won 1, lost 1. He still goes into that conversation.
Yep, 100%.
Because all those guys that have been put on a pedestal as perhaps being the best of all time, the Sugar Ray Robinsons of the world, for instance, they all had defeats, right? I know Floyd was undefeated, and a lot of people will turn to that and say, look at this. But as amazing as Floyd was, as incredible as Floyd was, a lot of people will say some of his most signature wins were not against guys in their primes. They were earlier in his career, but in the latter half of his career, maybe not as much. And so, again, you don't want to be going back to Spence. You don't want to be in that position whereby people are saying, well done, Floyd. You beat Manny Pacquiao, superb, but Pacquiao was past his best.
Exactly.
With Usyk, there is no but.
None.
Right? None. And you have to, and I'm not saying Usyk's above Floyd before people lose their minds. I'm just putting it out there that Usyk has done it at the highest level against the very, very best, against guys in their prime, in their backyard. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. I find it insane that anyone has the guts to accuse Usyk of ducking anyone. I've seen people say he's ducking Wilder. I've seen people, anyone says he's ducking Fury. I mean, how on earth is he ducking Fury when Fury is going out of his way, when the fight could perfectly be made now, to fight Derek Chisora for a 3rd time? If anyone is responsible for the fight not happening, it is 100% Tyson Fury, and I blamed only Tyson Fury.
I don't actually blame either guy here. I have to be honest here, because Usyk did come out and say, look, I need a break. I want to be out in, not until the spring perhaps, or I think they were saying he wanted 6 months break. So let's say you're talking about even if you push it as far back to the summer, what Usyk is asking for is not unreasonable. After all, if you want to see undisputed, you want to see 2 guys come in at their best. So you want him to be fresh. By the same token, if you want to see 2 guys coming at their best, well then Fury, if he feels he needs
Chris froze. See if he can get his connection back. It's probably due to the connection. Keep in mind we're completely different parts of the world. He is making very good points, though, for sure. I see where Fury's coming from when to tune up that the Chisora fight makes no sense. Yeah, you froze up there, Chris, at the end.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I was just saying how for me, as long as they both want tune-ups to be sharp, as long as the fight then happens, say, in the spring or the summer, I'm not going to hold it against either guy. In other words, Usyk said, I'm not ready yet. I need a bit of a break. I don't think that's a duck at all. It's reasonable. By the same token, I don't think Fury should sit around waiting for Usyk to be ready if he feels he needs a fight. So for me, neither guy has ducked the other guy yet. If the fight happens in the spring or the summer, then I can't accuse either guy of ducking.
Oh, yeah, for sure. If the fight happens, for sure, neither fighter is ducking. But one person that definitely cannot be blamed is Alexander Usyk. That's all I will say. The last person to blame is Usyk. I do have an issue with Fury fighting Chisora, though. A third Chisora fight. The first fight he won clearly. Second fight he made him quit. So why is there a 3rd fight?
I don't like it at all. I've always said, look, I don't expect him to fight a killer in the build-up to an undisputed title fight. That would, as a fan, I would love it. But realistically speaking, I don't expect it. We wanted the AJ fight, so it was a carrot dangled in front of us. And then after that, when it wasn't given to us, anything less than that's going to be disappointing. But realistically speaking, if you're going to fight a winnable fight, at least make it against the guy maybe who
you never fought. How about that? It's the guy you never. Or I'd rather see him rematch Otto Wallin than rematch Chisora. That would have been a good fight.
And that would have been a good preparation for another southpaw in Usyk. If he doesn't want the Wallin fight, even an undefeated guy like Ajit Kabayel, who's beaten Derek Chisora. Yes, we would all pick Fury to beat him, but there's a level of intrigue because they've never been in the ring together. There's no real intrigue with Chisora. We've seen it where he stopped this guy when Chisora was in his prime. You know, what makes you
I
think
know.
now that I don't know? It's
The
a
only
disappointing one. I have to.
the only positive to him fighting Chisora at third time is I guess Del Boy's getting a big payday. So we're all happy for that because people talk about BMF, which is like a term that made for the UFC, like guys that are willing to fight anyone and fought everyone. Chisora is that guy. He has fought everyone. He's not ducked anyone. He always comes to fight. He always brings it. So I'm happy he's getting a payday. But at the same time, for the fans' sake, it's a poor look. Now, a fighter. Oh, go ahead. I'll get to my next point right after.
Sorry, Max. I just wanted to quickly add. Chisora is a straight warrior, and one of the things that I really don't like when people say is, why is he fighting a guy with 12 losses? Chisora has fought guys who are great in the previous era and in this era. That some of the top heavyweights that people put on pedestals would have had a very close number to those losses if they'd fought the level of opposition he had.
For sure they would.
So my issue is not the record of Chisora.
It's that Fury beat him twice, right?
It's that Fury's beaten him twice,
exactly.
And he passed his best. Do you see what I'm saying? But in terms of who Chisora is, listen, man, if everybody had the level of mental fortitude and the mentality to approach fights like Derek Chisora, this sport would be household because the man is a straight warrior.
For sure. And honestly, I wouldn't have been mad if Anthony Joshua's comeback fight was against Derek Chisora. That's a fight that honestly should have happened in like 2015, 2016. So
I think they're good friends though. They're good friends outside of the ring. And sometimes if you have that closeness, and we're not just talking about friends, recent friends since turning pro. They were both fighting in Finchley. So before AJ even came up as a professional, Derek Chisora was the main guy in that area of North London. So he was sort of looking up to him. So he was almost like I wouldn't say a mentor, but like a big brother type of thing. And sometimes, I'm the sort of character where if I don't think I could ever fight a friend to try and really hurt someone you care about. It requires a level of killer instinct where you're able to sort of detach yourself from that emotional attachment. And maybe AJ just doesn't have that, and maybe Chisora doesn't. So I can't really hold that against them.
Fair enough. Chavo TV says, what do you guys think about Usyk saying he wanted to fight Wilder and he's coming to the Wilder fight but never showed up? My opinion is I really don't have any thoughts on it. If the Fury fight doesn't happen, then it's a bad look for Usyk. But if the Fury fight does happen in, say, April or May, then he's fighting the guy that beat Wilder arguably 3 times, at least twice. So I don't really have much opinion on it. If the Fury fight falls through, though, then I don't know.
But also, Chavo, don't forget, if you actually look at the words that he used, he said he was asked, if the Fury fight doesn't happen, who would you like to fight? And he said, well, then I'd like to fight Wilder. In other words, what he's saying is, if I've already beaten AJ, if Fury doesn't want to fight me, well, then I'm going to fight the next best guy in Wilder. That shows the warrior mindset he has. He didn't say, I'm going to fight Wilder next, which a lot of people are trying to spin it into.
Exactly, yep.
So yeah, if Fury turns around in the summer and says, I'm not fighting Usyk, then Usyk may very well want to fight Wilder. And if he doesn't, people might say, well, Usyk, why have you gone after, say, a cupcake if you could have gone after Wilder? Then I would say fair enough. But for the time being, you can't hold it against him for targeting undisputed. That's what fighters are supposed to do.
Exactly. And what we also have to mention is I don't think Wilder's going to even be able to fight Usyk. I mean, I used to never be someone that criticized the PBC or this, but, after repetition, after all these patterns, it's clear that they just aren't making out of house fights, or very rarely doing so. I think they're set on making Wilder versus Andy Ruiz, and I don't think anything's going to change that, even if he got offered Usyk. Just like when Adam Kaunaki was offered all that money to fight Anthony Joshua. Even if it's a great offer, I just don't think they're going to do it. I think Wilder's going to fight Andy Ruiz no matter what, and if the Fury fight falls through, Usyk should fight Joe Joyce. That's how I look at it.
Look, I mean, listen, the Joe Joyce, for me, the Joe Joyce fight makes sense. Joyce deserves a shot. He deserves a shot more than Wilder in some regards because he's yet to have his shot and his CV's superb. And Wilder's lost prior to the Helenius fight, and Helenius is way past his best. He had not won for 3 fights, right? In the Fury fights, he hadn't beaten him in any of those 3. So, listen, I understand that Wilder's still a massive player, but he needs to, in some regards, rebuild his position. There's no divine right to say, I need this title shot. So, listen, he's still there and thereabouts, but I think the PBC, to be honest with you, would make that fight simply because there's so much to gain. If he was to beat Usyk, he's back on top of the world. And I think based on that, they would take the risk. I don't for 1 minute think Wilder would avoid the fight, and I don't think the PBC would protect him from it at this stage. But I just also, at the same token, don't think that it's Usyk avoiding Wilder because he said, if the Fury fight doesn't happen next for me. Well, if it does, it's obviously not a duck, right?
Exactly. All we know for sure is Usyk, assuming he continues fighting, which we all know he will, is going to fight a good opponent next. Either Fury, Joyce, or Wilder. Any of those 3 fights, if he beats any of those 3 guys, just adds to his already stellar resume.
And the thing is, you can't duck a guy that you'd fight voluntarily. He's not mandated to fight him. He hasn't been ordered to fight him. So you can't really duck a voluntary guy. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, he might actually get ordered to fight Joyce, which is the thing people aren't even realizing.
Exactly. And then if he was to not fight Joyce and fight Wilder and vacate a belt, well, then he's ducking Joyce. Do you see what I'm saying? You have certain duties.
We got my boy, Big Boys Boxing here just on time, right when his cue. We're talking about the heavyweights. He's here now. Shout out to him. Check out his channel if you guys haven't already. He says if Fury Usyk doesn't get made, it will be because of Fury, not Usyk. That's exactly what I've been thinking for a long time. I've said on the stream, if it doesn't happen, the only guy getting blamed is Tyson Fury, because only one of these 2 fighters has shown patterns of not taking on the best at all times. I'm not saying Fury is duck top, guys, but he's definitely been less willing than Usyk, which doesn't say a lot, because I don't think any fighter in boxing truly has shown that they've been willing to fight the best like Usyk has. Shout out to my boy Big Say So. Check out his channel if you haven't already. Great dude. Always making great live streams. Salute to you, bro. He definitely has made many reasons to not fight Usyk. I remember a while back he said he wouldn't fight Usyk because he doesn't speak English. Then he fought Otto Wallen or something like that. So yeah, Fury's definitely less willing than Usyk has been. Well, it'd be a great fight for sure. It'd be very interesting. Heavyweight division is definitely a fun weight class right now. We got Dillian White returning in a tune-up fight against Jermaine Franklin. Not too excited for that, but it's good to see Dillian White return. Boxing combat, do we still favor Loma over Shakur and Haney after last night? Not even Tank or Ryan. I said on the stream I would pick right now Shakur. I actually switched my prediction from Loma and Shakur a few months back to Shakur. But after yesterday, I'm also picking Devin to beat Loma as well. I do think Loma would still defeat Tank and Ryan, however. Speaking of that, Tank versus Ryan, a fight that everyone said was happening next. I knew it wouldn't happen next. I was 100% sure it wouldn't. Out of nowhere, magically, the fight's shockingly not happening next. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that Ryan Garcia has some fantastic physical attributes which could potentially cause Tank some major problems. And Ryan is at his best when he's on the back foot. And because he's the taller guy, he'd be able to use that long, straight lead hand with that lovely left hook that he's got to try and time Tank on the way in. Antithetically, Tank is the sort of guy who's very, very good at luring a guy into a shot and setting up that big power shot. And we've seen Ryan dropped against Luke Campbell. So I think both of them will fancy their chances. One of the problems that Ryan Garcia has is that when he throws the long, straight right hand, his back foot often comes off the floor and it swings sideways and becomes quite square on. You can't do that sort of thing against Tank Davis. He did it against Javier Fortuna, and just before the knockout, he actually got caught with a little left hook. Again, you get caught with a big shot like that against Tank Davis, you're in serious trouble. So there are certain elements there where technical elements I think Ryan needs to iron out, but he's got the physical attributes. The rumors are that the fight happens at 136. Personally, I don't like that. And the reason is this. If you're capable of making 136, then you're capable of making 135. Either make the fight at lightweight or make it at 140, because the only reason you would make it at 136 is not to benefit in terms of Ryan needing to make an extra pound. The reason you'd make it at 136 is because it would officially make it a 140 fight. And it gives you points, so to speak, for essentially the 140 category. So if I beat Ryan at 136, or if I beat Tank at 136, it gives me a ranking at 140, but you're not fighting at 140. And I've always been against this sort of thing, against Canelo weight, for instance.
155, yeah.
Yeah, you're fighting middleweight title at 155. So
that was so ridiculous.
I mean, Max, imagine, listen, Usain Bolt, the fastest man in history. Do you know that over 50 meters, there are numerous football players, soccer players, who are faster than Usain Bolt? For instance, Hector Bellerin, a footballer, I know many people won't watch soccer out there, but I'm just giving you an example.
Yeah.
An athlete that played for Arsenal, faster than Usain Bolt over 50 meters. So if Hector Bellerin was to beat Usain Bolt in a race over 60 meters, how can he claim I'm the fastest 100-meter runner in the world?
Exactly.
It's stupid. You fight at the weight that you are supposed to fight at. So either make it a 135 and make it a lightweight fight, or make it at 140 and make it a fight
cheap.
Light welterweight. You see what I'm saying? So that's my one issue with the fight. Other than that, I'd love to see it, of course.
I would definitely love to see it for sure. And it is a bit of a cheap trick for sure. Now, why do you think this fight's not happening? I mean, I think we all know that the promoters just don't want to make it next. I mean, they say I noticed Ryan has been very confident about using Tank's name for a fight, but this is the same guy that's been saying this fight's going to happen next for 2-3 years. So I think Ryan Garcia needs to get more criticism than he's gotten for this fight not happening, because he said it's been next since 2021. I mean, this, oh, man.
Look, I mean, like I said, I want to reiterate, because a lot of people start saying, you're a hater, you're a hater. It's nothing to do with that. I think they're both brilliant fighters, but they've both got previous when it comes to maybe not making the best fights they could have made, right? For many years, there was talk of Tank Davis and Lomachenko. It hasn't happened. For many years, we haven't seen Tank Davison against anybody of note. We've also seen Ryan Garcia talking about winning the Devin Haney fight, and when he was in the position to make the fight, he didn't make the fight. So I'm reluctant to accuse any individual person when at the end of the day, they've both had some checkered pasts when it comes to maybe not making the fights they should be making. I don't know who's at fault. What I will say, though, is that Ryan does seem very keen on making the fight. So I'm hoping that with that in mind, the sort of pressure that is put on Tank to make the fight is one that sort of forces the issue. I didn't like what Steven Espinosa said about how they've agreed the framework and they're going to be fighting at 136, but now DAZN have to accept what, the sort of positioning or whatever. In other words, it almost seems to be as though he's saying, listen, DAZN, if you want Ryan to fight, then he has to fight with us. Just make it a joint thing whereby both networks broadcast the fight.
I know, just do it.
The fact of the matter is they've both got an awful lot to gain from winning that fight. So just take the risk. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. I definitely agree. The fact that all these stipulations, it makes no sense that it has to only be on Showtime. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, Chris. This is boxing. Boxing fans get put through the ringer more than any sports fans. Chris, we've been on here for an hour and a half. It's been great having you, brother. Before we wrap this up, can you tell people where they can find you if they haven't found you already?
Max, thank you so much for having me on. As always, it's wonderful to talk to you about boxing. I love the fact that, I consider myself to be an unbiased guy, and to be able to have conversations with people, even when you disagree, it's always done politely and people are bouncing ideas off each other. It's a brilliant thing. And that's why we create the content that we do. So thank you. You can find me at Chris Andre Boxing here on YouTube. You can find me at Bet Boxing on Twitter, everybody. I really appreciate everybody tuning in and for all your comments. Thanks, everyone, for watching. And God bless you.
Have a good one, Chris, and salute to everyone in the chat.
Take care, mate. Bye-bye.
Salute.